Montana Territory, June 1872. The wind howled low through the Bitterroot Valley as the auctioneer's voice barked above it, and Sheridan Kline was sold for the price of a mule and a sack of grain. She stood on the wooden platform beside the freight barn, arms pinned behind her by a rough spun rope, face bruised and eyes steady, even as the men below leered and spat their bids. Her husband, Cyrus Kline, stood to her left, sneering like he had won something. "She should have kept her mouth shut," he said, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "A woman has no business correcting her husband in front of others." Sheridan didn't flinch, not when he shoved her forward, not when the rope burned against her skin. She had spoken the truth. He had lied about the money owed to their neighbors, and for that she was being sold like livestock. The man who won her was old, with a missing tooth and dirt under his nails. He grinned, stepping forward, reaching for her arm. That was when the cowboy stepped from the shadows. "Let her go." The crowd turned. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, his hat low over his eyes. Dust clung to his coat, and the rifle slung across his back looked well used. His voice wasn't loud, but it sliced through the air like a clean blade. Cyrus scoffed. "Who the hell are you?" The cowboy stepped closer. "Name's Waylen Kerr, and I don't buy people." The bidder turned defensive. "I paid fair." Waylen didn't even look at him. His eyes were on Sheridan. "She can speak all she wants with me." Sheridan blinked. No one had ever said anything like that to her. Not her father, not her husband, not any man she had ever known. Cyrus spat at the ground. "She's my wife. You sold her." You put her on that platform and took bids. That makes you no husband." The tension snapped like a dry twig. Cyrus lunged, but Waylen moved faster. Fist to jaw, Cyrus hit the boards hard and stayed there. The old man who'd bought her backed away. "Ain't worth the trouble." Waylen cut the rope off Sheridan's wrists with the knife from his belt. He didn't touch her beyond that. Just set the blade back in its sheath and looked at her. "You all right?" She rubbed her wrists, voice hoarse. "I do not know. You got anyone?" "No," her voice cracked. "Not anymore." Waylen nodded once, then turned to the crowd. "This is done." No one argued. The crowd melted away like mist. Sheridan stared at him. "Why did you do that?" He met her eyes. "Because I heard a woman speak the truth, and no one should be punished for that." She swallowed hard. The last of her strength started to shake loose. "I have nothing," she said, quiet. "No home, no money. No family." "You have your name," Waylen said. "That counts for something." Her knees gave way, but he caught her before she hit the ground. Waylen rode a buckskin gelding named Flint. He set Sheridan in the saddle, walking beside her as they left the town behind. They rode west, toward the river, away from the men who had looked at her like a thing. She did not speak for a long time. Her stomach grumbled, but she said nothing. He noticed anyway and handed her a piece of jerky from his saddlebag. Night came fast. They stopped under a bluff near the river, and Waylen made a fire. He handed her a blanket, then settled a few feet away. "You can sleep. No one's going to touch you." She looked at the stars. "When I was little, I used to count them. Thought if I could count high enough, I'd be free." He glanced over. "You are now." She looked at him. "I do not know how to be. You will." In the morning, she helped him gather kindling. Her hands trembled. Waylen did not ask questions. He handed her an extra pair of gloves and nodded toward the trees. "Stay where I can see you." She nodded. By midday, they reached a homestead tucked near the hills, a cabin, a barn, a small corral. Waylen opened the gate and led Flint inside. "It ain't much," he said, "but it's mine." Sheridan didn't speak. She was staring at the wildflowers near the steps. Yellow, blooming and brave, inside, the cabin was warm and clean. A cot near the wall, a wood stove, shelves lined with tins. Waylen set a tin of beans to warm and filled a cup of water for her. "You can stay here," he said. "As long as you want." She looked up sharply. "Why?" He shrugged. "Because you deserve better than what you got. Most men do not think that." "I ain't most men." She studied his face. "You do not expect anything from me." "No. No work, no favors." He shook his head. "You can speak, Sheridan. You can breathe. You can stay. That's it." She let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped for years. That night, she sat near the fire with her knees pulled to her chest. Waylen was whittling something by the door. "I was 17 when I married Cyrus," she said, voice low. "My father gave me away like a cow. I thought it would get better." He did not interrupt. It never did. Waylen set the piece of wood down. You do not have to tell me. I want to, he nodded. I was smart. I read books. I asked questions that made me a problem. Waylen looked at her. Not to me, she swallowed. He hit me. When I spoke out in front of his friend, he said I embarrassed him. That I needed to learn. Waylen's jaw worked. You do not need to learn anything from a man like that. She looked at him, guarded. Why are you so kind? He met her gaze. Because someone should be. Her eyes filled, but she did not cry. He stood. I will take the cot tonight. You can have the bed, she blinked. That is not necessary. It is, he turned away, giving her the dignity of space. That night she lay in the bed and stared at the ceiling. Safe, warm, heard, something inside her shifted. The next day she helped patch a fence. Waylen worked beside her, quiet and steady. When she dropped a hammer, he picked it up without comment. When her hand blistered, he wrapped it gently. At dusk, they sat on the porch. She watched the sky turn gold. I do not know what to do with all this quiet, she said. You will learn, she looked down. I do not want to be alone anymore. He turned toward her. You are not. She met his eyes. Something fluttered in her chest. That night she stood by the fire, hands clasped. Waylen, he looked over. Thank you for seeing me. He nodded. Always. They stood there a long time, the silence full of something new, something beginning. The rain came soft the next evening, fine as flower dust and just as dry by morning. Sheridan stood at the edge of the paddock while Waylen checked Flint's hooves, the gelding calm under his touch. She watched the way he moved, efficient, quiet, like the noise of the world had long ago been burned out of him. I'd like to earn my place, she said, her voice low but clear. Waylen straightened up, brushing dirt from his palms. You don't owe me work. I know. She met his eyes. That's why I want to. He didn't argue. Instead, he handed her a pair of shears. Those shrubs along the west fence are creeping too close. You feel steady enough, clip them back. She took the tool without hesitation. By midday, her arms ached and her skirt hem was soaked through with dew and old mud. But the shrubs were trimmed, and a neat pile waited in the wheelbarrow. Waylen came by with a fresh tin cup of water and handed it to her without a word. She drank deep, watching him from the corner of her eye. You don't talk much, she said. I talk when there's something worth saying. She nodded once. That's a kind of peace. The next morning, she rose before the sun and lit the stove. The beans she found were old but sound, and she added a pinch of salt before setting the kettle for coffee. When Waylen came in from feeding the stock, he paused at the smell and glanced toward the stove. You cook, I learned when there was no one else who would. He pulled out a chair, nodding once. Then I'll be grateful. They ate in silence, but it wasn't empty. It was the kind of quiet that didn't press, didn't threaten. Just existed alongside them, comfortable as old leather. Later that day, a wagon trundled up the road, driven by a woman with a baby tied to her chest and a boy of 6 or 7 curled asleep in the straw bed. Waylen stepped off the porch as the wagon pulled up, and the woman called out before he reached her. Waylen Kerr, you still growing those sour apples I warned you about? He chuckled low. Still sour and still mine. Sheridan stood back, hands folded, watching the exchange with a cautious eye. The woman climbed down. I brought what you asked for last week, your flour and that tin of nails. I threw in some dried apricots. You can consider it a bribe for your apples. Waylen helped her unload the sack. Much obliged, me turned then, noticing Sheridan. She looked her over once, not unkindly. You keeping someone new? Waylen didn't flinch. She's staying for a while. Sheridan stepped forward, chin level. I'm not his wife. Me raised a brow. Didn't ask, but it's good to hear you speak for yourself. Sheridan nodded, uncertain. Me studied her a moment longer, then smiled. I'm up the road 3 miles. If you need cloth or something mended, send word. I ain't much for sewing, but I've got a needle and stubborn fingers. After me left, Sheridan lingered by the porch rail, watching the trees stir in the distance. Waylen brought out a basket and set it near her. There's thread and scissors in there. If you're good with a needle, might patch the curtain in the loft. A storm last spring tore it. She crouched beside the basket. I can do that. He leaned against the post beside her, arms crossed. Me's got a sharp tongue, but she means well. Her husband passed 3 winters ago. Sheridan kept her eyes on the fabric she was unfolding. Is that why she still drives her own wagon? She raised both her boys alone. Built her place with her own hands. Sheridan let the silence stretch a little before speaking. I never met a woman like that. You are one. She looked up sharply. His gaze didn't waver. That night she sat at the table sewing the curtain by lamplight. Waylen carved a new latch for the barn door, the curls of wood falling to the floor beside his boots. Outside, the coyotes called from far off, their cries thin over the hills. "When you were a boy," she asked, "did you know this is what you wanted?" He didn't look up. "Didn't know what I wanted, but I knew what I didn't," she waited. "My father drank. My mother left. I was 12 the first time I ran off, never went back." She stitched in silence. He continued, voice low. "A man like that teaches you early what not to be." She tied off the thread, folding the curtain neatly. "And yet you built this place, grew apples, let strangers stay." He finally looked at her. "Not all strangers stay strangers." The lamp flickered, casting long shadows across his face. She held the folded cloth in her lap, fingers resting on the seam. "I'd like to stay longer," she said, "if that's all right." Waylen stood, walked to the stove, and added a log. The fire caught with a soft crackle. "It is." As the log settled, she rose and hung the curtain in the loft. It swayed gently in the night breeze, and for the first time in years, Sheridan felt something in her chest unclench. She looked down at the man below, now seated again, working quietly. A warmth bloomed, steady and sure. She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. The river thawed slow as April crept over the valley, and the cottonwoods swelled green at their tips. Sheridan stood near the chicken coop, sleeves rolled, a basket of fresh laid eggs in her arms. The hens had begun laying again with the warmer weather, and she'd fashioned a nest box from old scrap wood behind the barn. Her stitches still showed in the curtain upstairs, but the fabric hung even now, catching the light like a quiet reminder of how far she'd come. Waylen was mending a broken axle for the small cart, crouched beside it with a thick leather strap in hand. She crossed the yard toward him, boots sinking gently into the sodden earth. "I found a nest under the porch," she said. 4 eggs, they must have been hiding them." Waylen looked up briefly. "Fox's been nosing around again. Tracks by the fence line this morning. I set a stone in the gap. You think fast." She knelt beside him, setting the basket nearby, not fast enough once. Waylen didn't speak right away. He tightened the last bolt, wiped his hand on a rag, then turned to face her. "You ever think about what you'd do different if you could start again?" "I think about what I'll do now," she said. "The past never gave me much choice. That's a kind of grit most folks don't keep." She picked at a thread on her skirt. "He used to say I was difficult, that I asked too many questions, but I never stopped wanting to know things." Waylen leaned back against the wheel. "What is it you want to know now?" Her eyes narrowed, thoughtful. "How to graft apple trees, how to keep bees, how to make vinegar. I want to learn things that last." "I can show you the trees," he said. "Never kept bees, but I know someone down toward Missoula who does." She smiled, faint but sure. "Then I'll write to her. I'll take you when the road's dry." Sheridan glanced toward the hills, where snow still clung in the folds of the ridgeline. "You ever think of leaving this place?" "I left too much behind to want more leaving." "Do you miss any of it?" He shook his head. "There's nothing back that way worth missing." They sat in silence a while, the kind that folds around 2 people without pressing them down. "I want to plant something," she said at last. "Something that'll stay through the winters." "There's a patch behind the barn," he said. "Soil's good. I'll haul a spade down there tomorrow." Sheridan nodded, folding her hands in her lap. "I've never had a piece of land that was mine. You do now." He said it plain, without ceremony, and she felt it land deep. That night, she found a book on his shelf, an almanac from 2 springs back, and read by lamplight, finger tracing the margins. Waylen sat across the room, oiling the rifle that leaned near the door. Rain tapped the roof, soft and steady, and neither of them spoke for a long time. "You were right," she said as she turned a page. "About what?" "I'm learning." He set the cloth down, watching her with something quieter than pride, something steadier than hope. "I know." The lamp guttered once, then steadied. The wind outside rose and fell again, like a breath held and released. When she stood to bank the fire, he joined her, setting another log on the coals. Their hands brushed just once, and she didn't pull away. "I never knew a man could be gentle," she said. Waylen didn't look at her, but his voice came soft. "There are different kinds of strength." She reached for the poker, nudging the log into place. "I'd like to learn that too." He turned toward her, his face lit by firelight. You already are. She didn't answer, but the silence between them shifted again, something warmer now, something beginning to take root. By late May, the soil behind the barn had been turned, raked, and marked with careful rows. Sheridan knelt with her skirts pinned up to her waist, hands buried in loam as she pressed seeds into the ground beans, squash, and a few herbs she'd bartered for with the preacher's wife down in Stevensville. The air smelled of new green and wet bark, and her sleeves were rolled past her elbows, forearms streaked with dirt. Waylen was mending the north fence, but she could still see him from where she crouched. He moved with the same quiet rhythm she'd come to trust, methodical, sure, never wasting emotion. Flint grazed nearby, tail flicking at the occasional fly, the only other creature within sight. She stood to stretch her back, brushing her palms on her apron. "Is that cedar you're using?" Waylen didn't look up. "Rot less than pine, holds longer." "I remember my uncle building a smokehouse with cedar slats. The smell clung to the meat." He drove a nail into the post and straightened. "You ever learn to cure?" "No, but I watched." "I remember the salt crust and how the hams hung for weeks." He set the hammer down. "If you want to try your hand at it, I've got a barrel of salt and a side of venison in the shed. We could rig something." She nodded once. "I'd like that." Later that evening, she stood at the wash basin, sleeves damp, hair braided back against the lingering humidity. Waylen returned from the woods with a brace of quail over his shoulder and a new tear in his shirt just below the collarbone. She turned from the basin, eyes narrowing. "What caught you?" "Barbed wire. I leaned wrong." "You'll need it cleaned. Sit." He didn't argue. She pulled the chair out, fetched the small bottle of carbolic acid from the shelf, and tore a strip from one of the old feed sacks. He flinched when the rag touched his skin but made no sound. "You've got a high tolerance. Pain's never been the part that lingers." She held the cloth steady, working with care. "No, it's the remembering." Waylen looked up at her. "You still carry it, some days more than others." She dipped the rag again. "But it's lighter than it was. Because of here, because of you." He didn't speak, but his eyes stayed on hers longer than they ever had. When she finished, she pressed the cloth flat over the scrape and tied it in place. "You'll heal," she said. "It's shallow." "I've had worse." She stood back. "I know." That night after supper, they sat on the step watching fireflies wink between the tall grass beyond the corral. Sheridan's hands were folded in her lap, her boots muddy from the garden. Waylen leaned against the post, a half-carved block of wood resting in his palm. "I was thinking," she said after a while, "of trying to write again." He looked over. "Stories, letters at first, then maybe more." "I used to write before everything shifted." "You still have the words." "I think so. They're just quiet right now." He passed her the carving, small, smooth, and shaped like a bird mid-flight. "I made it for you," he said. "To keep near if the words feel far." She turned it over in her hand, thumb tracing the wings. "You remembered I liked swallows." "I remember the things that matter." She held it close, the fireflies flickering behind her like floating lanterns. He stood and offered his hand. "Come see something." She rose, placing her hand in his without hesitation. He led her around the side of the barn to a patch of earth near the edge of the orchard. There in the dirt was a small sapling, no taller than her waist, its leaves still pale with newness. "I found it growing wild near the creek," he said. "Thought it might take better to good ground." She crouched beside it, fingers brushing the fragile stem. "What kind is it?" "Plum, I think. Might fruit by next spring if the weather's kind." She looked up at him, eyes glinting in the moonlight. "You planted it for me." "I planted it because it deserved a chance." She rose slowly, brushing the soil from her hands. "So do I." Waylen's gaze didn't shift. "You have it." They stood close, the orchard behind them, the night wrapped around their shoulders. Sheridan reached up, touched his jaw with her fingertips, not hesitant, but deliberate. "I want to stay," she said. "Not because I have nowhere else, because this is the first place I haven't wanted to leave." Waylen's voice was steady. "Then don't." He didn't move fast. He waited, hands still at his sides, until she leaned forward first. Her lips touched his, quiet and sure, like something long owed finally arriving. When they parted, she didn't step back, and he didn't let go. June settled over the valley with the warmth of a long-held breath. The orchard's branches unfurled in full green, and the soil behind the barn darkened with the promise of coming growth. Sheridan rose earlier now, before the sun touched the ridge, and walked the rows barefoot to feel the earth beneath her soles. It grounded her, this ritual of morning, of quiet breath and patient tending. Waylen was already outside, sharpening the scythe near the edge of the field. He glanced up when she approached, sweat beading at his temple, shirt damp from labor. She carried a tin plate with a wedge of cornbread and a few slices of salted quail. "I thought you might forget to eat," she said, setting it on the stone beside him. "I was waiting for an excuse to rest," he replied, taking the plate. "You always know. I'm learning to pay attention." He took a bite, chewing slow. "I've been thinking about the southern slope behind the ridge. The grass grows tall there, even through dry spells. Could be good pasture for goats if we fenced it proper." She sat beside him, resting her arms on her knees. "You want goats. I want to give this place more than it gives back. Goats'll clear brush, give milk. Might be a good trade down the road. I can learn to make cheese," she said. "I remember a woman in town who did. She used nettle instead of rennet, said it was what her mother taught her." He nodded. "Then we'll find nettles." They sat in the hum of insects and grass, the scythe untouched between them. The wind stirred her braid against her shoulder, and she tucked it back. "I never thought I'd build anything again," she said softly. "Not with someone else." Waylen looked up from the plate. "You never have to build alone." "I know. That's what's different." The next week, they rode into town together, the wagon creaking under a few sacks of apples and a bundle of dried herbs she'd wrapped in muslin. The general store had taken to trading for her mint and yarrow, and she'd begun to keep a ledger in the small desk she claimed in the cabin's front room. At the store, Mee met them with her youngest on her hip and a new bolt of calico under her arm. "I've been holding this for you," she said to Sheridan. "Thought it might suit you better than flower sack ends." Sheridan ran her fingers over the fabric, pale blue with tiny white flowers. "It's beautiful. Make yourself a Sunday dress," Mee said. "I've seen you in nothing but work skirts. Time you had something your own." Sheridan glanced at Waylen, who was loading the wagon. She smiled, soft and real. "Yes," she said. "I think it's time." By midsummer, the garden was thick with promise. Waylen built the goat shelter with cedar planks, and Sheridan learned to mix nettles into warm milk, watching it curdle with a strange, satisfying pride. They worked side by side, wordless when needed, laughing when the goats chewed on the hem of Waylen's shirt or when the rooster took to chasing his own shadow. One night, after they'd finished repairing the barn roof, Sheridan stood at the water pump, sleeves rolled, shoulders pink from sun. Waylen approached, wiping his hands on a strip of muslin. "You've got a blister coming on," he said, nodding toward her palm. "It'll harden." He took her hand gently, turning it over. "Still worth tending." His fingers were rough, but his touch was delicate. She watched him wrap her hand in cloth, her breath slow and steady. "I never used to think about what I wanted," she said. "It didn't seem like a question that belonged to me. It does now." She looked up at him. "I want this, you. This life, you have it." That night they lay together in the narrow bed they'd moved into the loft, the summer breeze slipping through the patched curtain. Sheridan rested her head against his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her cheek. "Will you marry me?" he asked. She lifted her head slightly, eyes meeting his in the dim. "I don't need vows," she said. "Not to know what we are. I want to give them anyway, not for the world, for us." She smiled. "Then yes." They married on a Sunday with only me, her boys, and an old preacher who came up once a month to read psalms and check on his flock. Sheridan wore the calico dress she'd sewn herself, and Waylen wore his cleanest shirt, the cuffs still frayed but pressed straight. They said their vows under the plum sapling, now shoulder-high and thick with leaves. Afterward, they shared coffee and bread with butter, and Mee's eldest played a fiddle tune learned from memory. The day stretched warm and golden. That night, after the others had gone and the lantern had been turned low, Waylen traced his fingers along the curve of her back. "You're not afraid anymore," he said. "No," she whispered. "And I'm not alone." Years passed, the orchard grew thicker and the goats multiplied. Sheridan's garden expanded, and her cheeses were traded as far as Deer Lodge. They built a smokehouse together, and she planted rows of sunflowers along the fence line. In the evenings, they sat on the porch and watched the light shift across the hills. In time, they added a second room to the cabin, then a cradle. Their daughter came one September night, dark-haired and quiet, eyes wide as the sky. They named her Aaliyah, after a line in a poem Sheridan once read aloud by lamplight, the kind that spoke of roots and wings at once. Waylen held her close and whispered, "You'll never have to wonder if you're wanted." Sheridan leaned against his shoulder, weary and whole, the fire crackling low behind them. They lived simply, fully, each day stitched to the next with purpose and quiet joy. And in every moment through harvests and winters, through the bloom of orchard and the hush of snowfall, Sheridan knew the truth of it. She had found her home. Not in a house or a patch of earth, but in him, and he in her.